I'm Father Fessio, the founder and editor of Venetia's Press. And with me today is my friend and fellow Jesuit, Father Bob McTeigue. But first of all, because it's McTeigue, I would like you to tell us what the correct pronunciation of your name is.
Well, Father Fessio, when I went to Ireland, everyone told me that I was spelling it wrong and saying it wrong, but no one could agree on a proper spelling or pronunciation, which only told me that I really was in Ireland after all. I was taught to pronounce it McTeigue, and
McTeigue.
and my research, the most Gaelic, the most Celtic oldest form is Tadgh, Tig, which means bard, poet, and philosopher. So
I
it's
see.
it's not only a surname for me, it is an eponym as well.
Very good. Well, and how would you like it pronounced for public consumption?
McTeigue, long A.
McTeigue. All right. And so, as you all know, Father McTeigue is the host of an interview show. We're turning tables now because he usually interviews. I'm usually an interviewee, but in this case, I'm going to be the interviewer, and he'll be the interviewee. But that show is called The Catholic Current, and it's available somewhere or other in the United States, mainly in the East, but it's
It's
also on the.
available on every podcast platform, and you can listen to it from the Station of the Cross studios at thestationofthecross.com. We have
That's
new
good.
programs Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern.
So if you're mowing the lawn or washing dishes or exercising, this is a great accompaniment. Now, Father McTeigue has a doctorate in philosophy from Georgetown University.
Oh, no,
Prior
the Catholic University of America. Heaven
Oh, I'm
forfend.
sorry. Oh, I'm sorry to have.
I'm wounded.
Yeah, terrible. But he then did enter the Society of Jesus after that doctorate. You had it before you entered, right?
Yes, I had it before I entered, and I found my Jesuit vocation through Father Spitzer. I was a layman in doctoral studies. He was a young priest, and we had the same dissertation director, the great Dr. Paul Weiss.
So he's got his doctorate in philosophy. He's taught at the university level. I got to know him well when he came to Ave Maria University in the early 2000s. We actually were, excuse me, suite mates. Excuse me. And now, as a member of the Jesuits in Exile, he is living in the East Bay, San Francisco, and running at a parish, and also 5 days a week for an hour. He has his interview show. But we are going to interview him on his recent book. We published one book by him called Real Philosophy for Real Persons. I'm not sure how big an audience that would have, how many real persons are out there. But this next book is called Christendom Lost and Found, Meditations for a Post-Christian Era. Now, I've actually read the book, Father McTeigue.
Oh, good. Me
But
too.
I don't want to reveal too much of the contents because I want our viewers and listeners to buy it and read it themselves.
Yes.
But what do you mean by post-Christian era?
That's a question I'm frequently asked. There are senior members of a certain religious community with which you and I have some familiarity who calmly talk about us living in a time of mature secularism. Here's my historical take on that. Since the French Revolution in 1789, France, once known as the eldest daughter of the church, said, here's a great idea. We'll all live without Christ, publicly and privately, communally and individually, and it'll be great. And what we ended up with is a lot of bad art and a lot of dead bodies as well. And it's kind of gone downhill ever since. This book was written as kind of a war journal during the COVID interruptions and people kinetically thirsting for justice in the streets by burning down their neighbors' shops. So it was written between November of 2019 and February of 2021. And as I looked at the window, as I looked at the headlines, and I looked in the mirror, I'd say, this can't be right. This can't be what God intended for his people. We can certainly do better. And that's why I talked about we need to find a way to recover the wisdom of what used to be known as Christendom. Christendom was a marriage of nature and grace. It was human nature and Christian revelation, rooted in Jerusalem, grew up and matured in Europe, and then spread out its universal good fruits throughout the world. We've had induced cultural amnesia since 1789, where we've been suffering the bitter fruits of that for decades now. I want to suggest that if we want to go forward, we have to recall the reign of Christ.
All right. Well, you're an interesting amalgam of Irish and Italian,
Yes.
excuse me, which makes you somewhat voluble. Uh, and you've explained what the Christian era is, but this is post-Christian. Let's start. What is the post-Christian era?
Well, the post-Christian era is since 1789. The West, that used to be called Christendom, has been parasitic upon the body of Christ, upon Western civilization, which is really Christian civilization, the dignity of the human individual, the flourishing of the arts and sciences under the reign of Christ the King. We've rejected Christ the King and have just been carrying on the momentum of that civilization, calling it Enlightenment, then modernity, then post-modernity. The post-Christian era said, well, we tried living without Christ. It was an absolute disaster. See also the 20th century. What can we reclaim? And I think we can reclaim the wisdom of Christendom without falling afoul of the accusation that somehow we're trying to turn back the clock or be nostalgic for the 1950s or something like that. Not at all. Of course, you can't turn back the clock. Time runs only in one direction, but we can retrieve the wisdom and some of the best practices of Christians who knew how to be Christians in a fallen world and plant that in our own time and place.
Okay, so post-Christian means humanism without God, as de
Yes.
Lubac wrote in his book. Post-Christian is positive. Now we're going to
Yes.
retrieve what was
Yes.
lost in the
Right.
post-Christian era. Excuse me. All right. So may I take that to be well, this is sort of rhetorical, but because I have read the book at least once, that Christendom lost is post-Christian.
Right.
Christendom found is post-Christian.
That's correct. Yes.
All right. Now, you dedicate this to the memory of John Sr.
Yes.
What memory do you have of him?
Only through his writings. He died before I discovered his books. But I read his books. The one was called "The Death of Christian Culture," which was a brilliant diagnosis of what I had later called the post-Christian era. And then he did a follow-up book called "The Restoration of Christian Culture," which I'm calling the post-Christian era. And then I've read various collections of his essays and so on. So here was a man who was steeped in the tradition, but he came to the tradition relatively late in his life. He wandered through the secular wasteland by his own account for a number of years, rediscovered authentic Catholic tradition, saw its link to a truly humane and godly civilization, and said, we have to do better. We need to go backwards in order to go forwards. So I was just kind of a restatement of that. But as I said, told as a day-by-day war journal during a critical time of people being bathed in the bitter fruits of the rejection of Christ and the public order.
All right. Well, I knew him personally. And I also knew many of the students of the Pearson program, which he and two other Catholics had at Kansas University of Kansas. Excuse me. We're cold here. And just a couple of anecdotes about him. Well, first of all, not an anecdote so much, but during the 10 years he had this program, there were 800 converts of the Catholic faith at this university. And not only the faith, but the Kansas City Star actually had a headline, a cartoon across the front page of the paper, 4 different little windows there. The first one, this was in the 1960s and 70s, showing these students coming, University of Kansas, beards, smoking pot, barefoot, jeans are torn up. And then the next picture is they're going into the Pearson program and they've got suits and ties. And then the next picture is their, the second, anyway, the last picture is their monastic garb going into a monastery, because many of his former students became monks. In
Right.
fact, they joined Foncambeau in France, who came back to have a foundation in Oklahoma,
Right.
and so that his influence continues even to this day in that
Yes.
monastery. That's one
It's a
thing.
wonderful
Secondly,
legacy.
when I began a program called the St. Ignatius Institute at the University of San Francisco, and we brought him in as a speaker. And this was in the early days of EWTN. And so I asked Mother Angelica to send a crew out, which she did. And so we had the room was packed, and he was giving a talk on Catholic culture and restoration of culture. And I told him, well, this is being televised. So what he said, the first thing he said was, all you watching this on TV, I've got one recommendation: smash the TV, get rid of that.
Yeah.
Mother Angelica was not happy. Okay, so in your preface, you talk about his view of Christendom and Malcolm Muggeridge's view, which seem to be contradictory, but you think there's a paradoxical reunion of them. Explain that to me.
It's two sides of the same coin. Malcolm Muggeridge, again, a man of serious faith and learning and erudition, very much influenced by Mother Teresa, used Christendom in a negative sense of the word. What one friend called the status quo ordo, what some social critics call the business of churchianity. So in that sense, Christendom is the contemporary restatement of the unhappy relationship between Herod and the Pharisees. So that's the negative side. And we have to take that critique very seriously
So Christendom
when,
has kind of institutional
right.
rigidity and okay,
Well, it's not only institutional rigidity, but taking the coin of
bureaucracy.
Caesar and pandering after the approval of the court jesters, or what our father St. Ignatius would call pride, riches, and honors. And then the flip side of that is institutional Christianity at its best, building the cathedrals, the monasteries, the hospitals, the schools, the universities, and so on, where the faith isn't just me and my personal relationship with Jesus in a corner somewhere, but actively being leaven in the bread, evangelizing the world, also known as the old evangelization.
So you see this as a view of our present time, which integrates the insights both of Muggeridge and of John Senior
Right.
in the forward by Joseph Pierce, who is a wonderful author and writer in his own right, obviously.
Yeah, and a friend.
He compares this to books by Ratzinger, C.S. Lewis, and Kraft. That's a pretty high bar, is it not?
Well, Joseph Pierce is a friend and a very, very kind man. I approach those names with fear and trembling. I'm just some kid from Newark, New Jersey. I show up with a couple loaves and a fish. I offer them to our Lord, and then we see what he does with them. This book, in a certain sense, is a reflection of the fact that I've been thinking and writing and praying and preaching for a long time now, and maybe it's a sign of my old age that I'm starting to connect the dots in a bigger picture in a way that I haven't been able to do so before. Things have been wrong for a very, very long time in the public aspect of Christian life, as well as the private, the corporate, and the individual. And uh, post Christianity is running its course. It's collapsing. The momentum that it used to ride on the husk of Christian civilization, that's almost gone too. We're told now that it's time for a Eucharistic revival. It's another topic for another time. I think we need to do more than just resuscitate business as usual. We need to reclaim the wisdom of the past and plant it in our own time.
Yes, and Cardinal Ratzinger, in his book Faith in the Future, which were radio talks he gave in 1969 and 70, his last chapter is on the Church of the Future, and it's exactly what you're talking about there, is that we have to have creative communities of intentional Christians who live the faith, love the tradition, live it in their lives, and we will be there when our society finally collapses, reaches a dead end, and
Right.
looking for, a home.
Right.
Uh, you know, epigraphs are always important, I think, to me, especially in good authors like yourself. Uh, and you have two epigraphs here, one by Logan Pearsall Smith. I won't read that. It has to do with what are you going to write about? Basically everything.
Mm.
But then this one by Thomas Pruffer. This book is a whole, not really a collection, not what Aristotle calls a heap, Soros. Interesting, Soros is a heap, but a unified and organic work. The parts are not merely juxtaposed, but affect and come in. Well, that's an interesting epigraph because this is an unusual book. It's not written as a book. This is kind of like your journal that
Yes.
you then put together, right? So how can you claim that this book is a whole, not a mere collection, if it's merely the summation of your random musings during the time of war?
Thomas Pruffer was a professor of mine, and I've reread some of his work recently, and I found that he had more of an influence on me than I had discovered. I think that there is a unity to the book. Yes, it was a journal. I wrote it in a very unusual way. I got a very thick journal of very thin Japanese paper, and I resolved to fill the journal before I reviewed it. We both know my previous book, Real Philosophy for Real People, took entirely too long to write because I wanted to craft each sentence to Platonic perfection before I went forward. So, in the spirit of ad jure contra, I said I don't want to be caught up on the paralysis of analysis. But once I completed it, I saw that there really was a whole, and the guiding principle was analyzing uh, the recent past and current events in light of the Muggeridge John Senior approach to Christendom, avoiding the Christianity, accepting the blandishments of the world, seeking the coin of Caesar and the applause of the court jesters on the one hand, and on the other hand, urging for that reunion of nature and grace that God intended for the whole world through Christian revelation. So, in that sense, I argue that it really is a unity.
All right. Uh, I mean, I found it fascinating, even though I like you and everything. But uh,
You didn't say that it made you like me more, though.
yeah, because the meditation, well, there's not a whole lot in here that we haven't discussed over wine and bread at one time or another, and it has these different episodes in it which you've strung together. But as you say, there is unity to them. Uh, just to give people a kind of a flavor of this, I thought we'd pick on this one chapter here, one topic, which is a Jesuit's first look at the Benedict option.
Yes,
And you have something to say about that, which is both positive and critical. So,
right.
can you elaborate a bit on that?
Sure. Well, Rod Dreher made a name for himself with a book called The Benedict Option, and it was inspired by a book that first came out in the 1980s called After Virtue by Alistair McIntyre. I read that my first summer as a Jesuit. When Jesuit novices have summer vacation, we call it villa. My province at the time had a house at the Jersey Shore, and while other people were bringing, beach reading, novels and thrillers and so on, I was reading Alistair McIntyre. And at the end of the book, where McIntyre talks, very critically about the way the world was going, even back in the 1980s, he said, what we need is a new Saint Benedict. And the illustration he gave, when Benedict saw that the world was falling apart, that this Roman civilization was collapsing, he built monasteries. And here I'm paraphrasing. And the monks pulled up the drawbridge and copied manuscripts and prayed the Liturgy of the Hours, the divine office, until the sound of the slaughter stopped, and then dropped the drawbridge and went out and re-evangelized what's left over. Now, there's a very great wisdom to that, which I appreciate and respect. But even as a novice, I said, but I'm a Jesuit. Jesuits don't pull the drawbridge up and wait out the storm. They go out into the thick of things, and more often than not, they get themselves killed. Nearly all Jesuit saints and blesseds were martyrs, as you know. So, how does a Jesuit see the collapse of civilization in his own time. Just as Augustine looked at the window while writing The City of God and saw the Vandals laying siege to his city of Hippo, I see the corrosive effects of naturalism, modernity, postmodernity corroding the Enlightenment sham, and corroding even the foundations of authentic Christian civilization. It's all going to teeter sooner or later in both of our lifetimes, I believe very strongly. What does a Jesuit have to say to that? Well, a Jesuit who knows the spiritual exercises say you have to preach Christ crucified, and you have to proclaim Christ as King. Christ the King who is crucified and risen, Christ who, yes, returns in glory to judge the living and the dead in the world by fire, but Christ who reigns now. Belloc was right, Christ or chaos. To the degree that you see madness in the world, you see human life not in conformity to Christ. A Jesuit is obliged before God to say that out loud.
All right. So you would say as Jesuit, we should not pull up the drawbridge, but be out there sallying forth,
Right.
doing what we can, which is what, of course, you try and do with your radio, and we
Yes.
do with our publishing. But what about, the Catholic family homeschooling their kids or trying to find a Catholic school? To what extent should they pull up the drawbridges?
Well, towards the end of the book, I lay out different options. Rod Dreher says the Benedict option is what he calls secession in place, and the forming of small intentional communities. I also talk about, do you build an ark? Do you go into the catacombs? Do you sally forth in terms of a reconquista? And the short answer is it depends. Are you a homeschooling mom? Are you a brain surgeon? Are you pregnant? Are you I don't know. You have to discern for yourself in your time. I think the universal call to holiness demands a profound conversion, especially in the sick times that we're living in. We do have to form communities, and sometimes maybe we need to store away beans and band-aids and start vacuum sealing hosts and putting away altar wine. But you have to make that decision as a family and as communities of families. We live in a hostile world that, as civil structures begin to corrode even more, are going to become even more hostile. As I say very often from the pulpit, we're going to find out very soon that not only is lukewarm Catholicism inadequate for the needs of our souls and the spiritual dangers we're going to face, we're going to find that even lukewarm Catholicism is too costly even for lukewarm Catholics. So my book is a wake-up call to say we've got to get serious about discipleship, and we have to find communities that will help us to live out both the spiritual and the corporal works of mercy.
Yes, so I would say that we need actual monasteries and
Yes.
actual convents with contemplative religious praying, and that's an important, very important part of the church.
Yes.
We also need communities, as you say, of lay Catholics who around their parish or around a particular group support and encourage each other, but they're living in the world, and there's different ways, as you say, each person has a different way of witnessing, and some it's just by being there, and people can recognize something different, they should, about a serious Christian, and sometimes just by saying this or speaking up or whatever. So it's diversified, many gifts, many spiritual gifts, all one body. But I do think that Christendom will not in the immediate future be a large-scale public Christian structure like what it was in the Middle Ages. But Christendom still needs to exist, even if it's kind of broken up into small Christendom, so to speak, that are connected, and not just by the internet, because that's good. Like we're doing this now, and we're across the bay, but we're digitally together here, virtually together. That's important. That's good. Podcasts are good, but nothing can replace the personal contact with others to form a community and to spread the faith. However, you need ammunition. You need means, and that's what books do. That's what podcasts do. That's what the radio does.
Yes.
So before I conclude this, do you have any other things you want to say about this book besides to buy it?
Well, yeah, you should certainly buy copies for your friends. This is something that it's something that you can read a little bit at a time, digest at your own pace. It should be studied. It should be prayed over. It should also be discussed with family and friends, so that you can look at each other and say, "How shall we live together?" You know, have a weekly discussion group based on this book. Resolve to go to mass together on Sundays, resolve to observe the first Saturdays together, as Our Lady says at Fatima. But read the book and then talk about it with others who've read the book. If you do that, then I think that the book can do its good work in people.
Do you think it pairs best with, excuse me, with a cigar or with a pipe?
Well, I'm sure that Chesterton and Tolkien would lean towards pipes. That takes a little bit more attention. You can read it while smoking a cigar, and then discuss it with people with pipes. I think that would be suitable, or over wine and cheese, accessing my inner Italian.
Well, that's my second question. Would it pair best with a Chardonnay or a Burgundy, kind of a light red, or more of a dark red, like a
Oh,
Merlot?
no, you want a very robust red with some strong cheese, probably Stilton.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you, Father McTeigue, for this interview, and we hope to see you in the next Ignatius Press podcast. All who are listening or watching, God bless
I
you
would, I
all.
would like that very much. God bless your good work,
All
Father.
right.